Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the special board meeting in Menlo Park Fire Protection District, December 10th at 6:03. And we'll start with roll call and we'll give Virginia the chance, Director Crawley, the chance to state her participation being remote.
Okay, I'll start. Roll call. Director Bloom.
Oh, here, sorry.
Director Jones.
Here.
Director Bernstein is absent. Director Solano.
Here.
And Director Crawley.
I'm present and I am participating remotely under the Brown Act's Just Cause exemption because I'm out of state taking care of a family member, my mom, so I've got to be here right now. And also for the record, my mom's in the next room and she's 18 years older, but I don't think she's going to be coming in and out, but mainly not in the same room that I'm in.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for joining us by Zoom.
Thank you.
And so with that, we'll move on to the regular agenda, which is discuss and provide feedback on the strategic plan that was distributed to the board. And Mark, I don't know if you're going to tee this up.
I will tee it up and then hand it over to Dan Peterson with the Triton. And this draft that we have in front of us is a result of the work of our consultants and a number of meetings, including with our community groups, a meeting with the board, and 3 days, 2.5 days of offsite internal stakeholder meetings, and also quite a bit of feedback through surveys. And so I know we met with the board asked that we come back to them for additional input once we have a draft. So that is why we are here today, and I will turn it over to Dan.
Okay, actually, before you go, I was just going to mention to the board, I think the two or three things that the board should focus on for this evening, besides your presentation material, is everything, just the question that will come up afterwards for me is everything that we think should there in the document? In other words, have they missed anything? Number two is kind of prioritization. And number three is any suggestions for format, structure, or anything else that's in the document. So those 3 items. So content, is anything missing? Prioritization, followed by any constructive comments about the structure. On that note, I will hand it off to you.
And my intent, I'm Dan Peterson with AP Triton, so my intent today is to not go over a lot of, I don't have a PowerPoint, I don't have a lot of things, I just think what you talked about is exactly the focus that we want to hit on today. You got your packet, we talked last time about the process. The chief just kind of summarized it in that space. You've had a chance now to look at what was captured by the community and the group and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, challenges. But if we want to, probably the simplest thing for us to do is just go straight into the meat of this plan and talk about the fact that we put everything into the sieve and the strategic players underneath Chief Lorenzen identified the things that would move the organization in the best direction over the next 5 years. A key part that I want to call you to is that almost every strategic plan starts like this, right? Starts with a bunch of things. Everybody wants to get the things done in the first 1 to 2 years because they might be able to, but you can't always think about the specific action items that might come in year 3, year 4, year 5, right? So the way that we present this and the way that we're asking the chief to administer it is every budget cycle, you're going to review all of the action items, identify what you completed, look at the current action items and see if they're still accurate, and then decide if there's maybe some new action items that meet the outcome statement of the initiative. So know that this isn't everything that this plan will do, but it does get things started in the right direction. There's also a number of items here where they weren't ready to solidify necessarily the specific direction. So they needed to maybe capture the initial direction of being determine what's happening here and then make a game plan based on what we learned. So there's a number of components in here that relate to that. And as we walk through these, I'm anxious to do exactly what you described. And What I can do is kind of start, I'll share my screen and then that'll put it up there. I'll be able to make changes to the report itself as you might want, right, to make sure that we hit it. And then cover what we need to do.
So if there's miscellaneous comments as you're going through it, do you want us to pause you and hit those? And then come back to the prioritization?
I would
or-
prefer this be a conversation than a presentation. I think that's what, we're at a stage today where I think that's the best.
Okay,
Director, can you see that on your screen okay? From your location?
Yes, thank you. And I actually have the draft that I'm reading on
Wonderful.
my phone too.
Wonderful.
I'll follow along with y'all on that.
Thank you. When I roll up, these critical issues came from discussions throughout the group as they kind of narrow the focus of what those strength, weakness, opportunities, and challenges were. These critical issues turned into this overview of initiatives. So this sits on page 11 in your draft. And I think when we start, this kind of gives that big picture of the 5 major initiatives that created. We're also a big fan of making sure that we don't put too many things in a plan or make it too bulky or large, because then it tends to not get done, right? Everything in the district is continuing to happen. People are continuing to go on calls. The budget continues to get developed. Payroll continues to get delivered. All of those things happen. Those aren't part of this plan. This plan is about taking care of the initiatives that were identified as either weaknesses or opportunities, or even capitalizing on the strength to move it forward. So these big picture areas were organized through generous discussion with the team. I mean, we spent probably almost a full day trying to wordsmith this in a way that would move the group in the room in the direction they felt it could move them, right? We don't come in and tell them specifically what to do. We make sure what they're saying is to be done, is done reasonably, has a time frame to it, etc. Now, we can take and move right into each initiative and talk about the action items, or I'm curious where you would like to go. The next page starts into initiative 1 and the specific action items.
yeah, so before we go there, I had a couple comments on just the SWOT analysis.
Sure.
If you're open to it.
Of course.
And some of it was just categorization of things.
Okay.
So as an example, on page 10, where you have financial, under weaknesses in the upper right corner, about 7 bullets down, you have financial support of salaries and benefits consistent with community standards. And I don't see that as a community issue. I see that as an internal issue.
You're in the community section?
Community section, yeah, on page
Yeah.
10. And then corresponding to that, if I shift over to page 11, where you have a bunch of the first set of challenges, the demographic challenges, development of multi-story buildings, traffic, CalPERS. I don't see those as internal weaknesses. I actually see those as community weaknesses. So I guess what I'm trying to communicate is I don't necessarily agree with all the categorization
Yeah.
between community and internal.
Well, let me help you with that.
Okay,
And this will make a lot better sense. We could probably put some clarity in this. The community was what the community members identified. And so it wasn't external only. The community SWOC was what was captured with the meeting with the community,
okay.
right? So they identified internal strengths and weaknesses and external opportunities and challenges.
Got
And
it.
some of those overlap. But we wanted to keep them separated so that they could be identified where they came from.
So really, community is not community in its content,
Correct.
it's community, it's captured from the community.
Yes, and I can easily put a little more clarity in that.
I think we should. Yeah, because otherwise, yeah, it looks like they're, because I have like about 15 of them circled,
Well, there's
that
a
are
whole
all
lot of overlap.
overlap or crossover. But if what you're reflecting is what was captured from the community, was captured from the internal discussions, then that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, good, I'm glad of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any comments before he jumps into the critical issues and service gaps? I think it's what we're doing next.
Gary,
I just have. Oh, good.
I'm trying to find my raised hand feature, sorry.
No, just
So-
speak up, it's probably gonna be the easiest.
Okay, so I understand Gary's questions and I agree with him. The other thing is if we go through all of the, God, I can't remember what page it starts on, like, you just had it on the page. It was like page 11 or something like that. It was that table of contents of all of the initiatives, and then before you get into each initiative, yeah, I think it was 11, 12. Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I know that we, like initiatives 1 through 5, I think they do capture a lot of what we need to, as a fire district, need to be aware of and, kind of work on, or, at least pat ourselves on the back for. But when we're looking at this strategic plan, I kind of feel like we should probably, as a board, prioritize like what these initiatives should be for, them to be implemented. I mean, how were these prioritized? Like initiative 1, I mean, to me, that's really important. So that should be number 1, right? But throughout the report, you have initiative 5, which is operational infrastructure, for example, that could probably use some improvement. But so how did that get to be number 5 versus number 3, which is workforce demographic? I mean, just how were these put in order? I guess is my question.
Yeah, the order, the service to the community, we usually encourage that being the first initiative.
First, yeah, so I understand that.
And then these are not, we did not spend a lot of time deciding the order as much as they are just initiatives, right? So these, for the discussion in the room, service to the community was clearly something everybody wanted to make sure was the priority and the first thing people would read, right? Leadership was the next priority to talk about. And then it gets a little fuzzy below those two as far as what order maybe you want them in. Initiative 3, workforce demographic. Are they hiring high quality candidates? Organizational culture, professional development, and then infrastructure. They organized them into these 5, and they went back and forth a little bit as new action items, as new things. And then you can imagine the room working through and then going back to look at the weaknesses, adding a few more. And so these names changed a lot through the couple of days that we were working on them, right? So this set of initiatives, then each one has specific action items under them on the next few pages. So really, if you want to reorder them, I don't think anybody is going to argue that that's not it. There just wasn't a significant amount of time worrying about the order they were in, other than what I had just shared.
I suspect the order has more meaning to the board potentially than.
Well, it's a
to
public
people
facing
that-
document. that
Yeah,
tells the community
because
what
an
you want.
individual, if you're an individual in administration that's assigned to something, you're the finance person, you've got a task, that's your priority item. But that doesn't make it necessarily the highest or the lowest priority from a overall service perspective or an overall organizational perspective.
You have
So
a desire.
I do think the board should have a discussion about the prioritization of it. We don't have to have it right this second, and still like to let you get kind of through the document.
Okay.
And before I even got there, I had another comment on where you have your critical issues and service gaps, which is the section immediately before.
Yes.
And you call these critical issues, which, and this goes back to, it's a public facing document. I don't think service to the community is an issue for us. I think there's an opportunity to do more, to do better. So critical goal or critical focus area or something, but issue to me just feels like the wrong word in that particular section.
Okay, so you'd rather see, I have zero problem with the word focus, because I think you're right. Some of these things they're not problems as much as they are areas to focus on.
Yeah, I think normally when a community member reads critical issue, their interpretation of that is what something's critically broken. And I don't think that's what you're trying to convey here.
I think you're absolutely right.
Okay, so before we go to that next section, just on this section, does any other board members have comments on this part?
I have comments on, this one. I think I don't know if it's an issue of focus or even eliminating, the word critical, because when we're talking about critical, that gets into this whole notion that you just got the reference. So it may just be a matter of semantic in terms of finding a word that's less urgent. I think that in some areas it may be urgent, but in critical, when it's used critical, and again, I think it's the perspective that you,
Maybe focus area one,
I think
focus
so.
area two.
right, I think that would be more, to me, a more important, rather than critical issues. The other part, and I lost my thought, that to move down when it got into those SWOT analysis, I don't think it was that one, it was,
Up above,
yeah, where it talked about the critical issues, and it was mentioned that those were not necessarily priorities. Yeah, let me find this section. You said it was not necessarily priorities, but I thought I heard that they were priorities.
I think the clarification he gave me on that section was, this is capturing the input organized in the 4 categories from the various groups.
Okay, in terms of it's on the strategic plan that we should talk about the initiatives, that those were initiatives 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and 5, that they were not necessarily any,
Correct. They were not prioritized.
they were not prioritized. Is that the understanding?
the first 2 were probably, if you're looking at the service to the community and the leadership of the department, the other 3 were not necessarily in an order. There wasn't a significant discussion on which order they were in from the workshop. So we can easily change that, and that's not a problem.
Well, the thought was, because part of overall what I have not said I'm reading it wrong, but it's, there's an overall arching work that the board, I think, should do or should become engaged in, whether it's relating to board, development, as we encounter the community always come up with certain things, whether it's how they're being impacted by one thing or another. And as a board, I think, a member, I take on that seriously, no matter what it is, to kind of try to get to an understanding of what that person said makes any sense or not, and how we as a district or either exceeding or failing in certain areas. And oftentimes it's not necessarily, it's a staffing issue, it's more of a board getting an understanding themselves and directing. Our mission is what our mission is, but our focus within that mission, I think, if it's board driven or board prioritizing, is something that I just didn't quite see how it really fit in this whole document. That makes sense.
Okay. I think there's a lot of areas in here when we get into the actual action items that are asking staff to prepare information and then bring it to you through the budget process, right? So they would look at the performance of the dispatch center, for example, decide if it's, because there just wasn't the kind of numbers available to accurately evaluate it at this moment in time. Determine that and then bring that to you. So remember that what we're asking the chief to do in this process is that once this is adopted, you're gonna get a section in your budget that talks about this plan. And they're gonna say, we wanna do these action items this year and it costs this much to do it. And through that process, some of those things are gonna bring additional information back to you through the year to make a decision. Okay, now we know exactly what that is or what that problem is. And now we need to decide whether we want to fund it and move forward with it, or are we just happy with where it's at on that process, right? You go through that next cycle and then you get reports on the completion. Then the next year you get more detail. Some of these things would become pretty granulated by the time the staff has done all the work to give you what you need. So you ratify the actions that they're gonna take each year, guide them, nudge it over. These are not stone tablet documents to bring in. They are going to morph and change as you go along in the next 3 to 5 years. We start with a formula that makes that happen, but really nothing happens in here unless you allocate the funds and the time to do it.
I think I get that part of it, and I like that, it makes sense. I think some of what I'm trying to get at is that like a volcano, when it vibrated erupted, place from the below and it pushes itself up to the top before it explodes out. So as a board, how do we, I'm trying to figure out within the structure, how would that get addressed before it blows into a full-blown type of situation. And I guess that's the kind of structure for me that I look for within any kind of strategic plan. How, no matter what comes up at any given time, how is that addressed? How is within the structure that it's kind of being implemented, trying to be implemented?
Yeah. Well, I think, let me take a stab and see if I can get to where you wanna be. So you have this document set, right? And you've got something that you're concerned about, that you're feeling is a weakness or an opportunity for the district. First and foremost, if you don't see it in this document, then we need to have a conversation tonight, right? And then if you do see it in the document, the staff has said, we think we can work on that in this fiscal year. If that's a good fiscal year for you to work on, then that's great. If you need it done earlier, then we need to have that conversation and the chief needs to say whether or not he can move it forward. So you know already what the rumbling is below the surface, right? And you know that you're gonna be brought something. So through the year, an action item starts to be worked on, and the chief and his team identify enough things to be able to talk to you about, right? So let's say it's the one action item that relates to ambulance transport. They go dig into that ambulance transport, they learn what the quality of care is, they figure out the kind of metrics that they can measure and what they can't measure. And then they agendize that on a board meeting and they share what they know at that moment in time, somewhere through the process of that fiscal year. So you don't get surprised by an explosion at all. You already know that there's things being worked on because it's in the game plan. Am I hitting it on?
Yeah,
Where
you're
you
hitting
want?
it, and you're almost there. You said,
Yeah, the part that needs to happen then is when he comes in and he gives you the package, right? You can right then there and say as a group that either I'm happy with what you learned or I really don't like it. Now let's modify this action item. Now what I want you to do is go do X instead of Y. So you get to redirect and change as components are brought. There are a number of things in here that are gonna be brought to you through the next few years that are bringing you information of what they learned. They may even present to you and say, here's the metrics we plan on evaluating, and you may say, I want this one as well. And then they'll add that one to the layer and they'll bring that back to you to kind of look at.
That's
What
why,
what part am I missing?
yeah, Robert, that's why I was saying that I think one of the key things the board has to do is offer commentary if something is just blatantly missing from the plan. Getting that in the early version of it is not a bad idea.
and I get that part, the part of it that is, I get that
Yeah.
part. The
Go
other
ahead.
part is that midway, during the game, something comes up. How did that something do we go back to these, critical issues and see if it fits within that structure first? Before we begin to kind of talk about adding, a fixed critical issue? How did that process, how do we resolve?
I think what you said right there is perfect. I think if it fits into one of the 5 initiatives, then you add a brand new action item. If it's big enough and if it doesn't fit anywhere in here, then you can add a 6th initiative. The thing that's really important about this is you gotta think of it as more of a living document. It is a living, breathing document that you, every adoption of the budget, you're kind of ratifying it at that moment in time. But 6 months in, you can add action items, you can add issues. If something dramatically changes, you can also look and say, this action item under initiative 3 is no longer worth anything to us. Stop working on it. Completely. It's gotta be living, it cannot be a binder sitting on a shelf for it to do anything for you.
The part of that I struggle with when I hear that is we're going to do it at budget time, yet it's a living, breathing document through the year. And I think something the board could do on a more regular basis, whether it's quarterly or twice a year, is do a review of the document and say, has anything changed? Because waiting for the annual budget cycle, to me, seems like a long gap from the time something really important could start emerging.
Yeah.
And as you know, from running organizations, things can boil up very quickly.
Yeah.
And, and yes, that could cause the process, but sometimes organizations don't adjust the process if there's not a regular checkpoint on the process itself.
Yeah.
And so I think something the board can decide with the chief on is the frequency of which the board wants to do a checkpoint. Maybe it's 3 times a year, maybe it's twice a year, maybe it's 4 times a year. I'm not opinionated on which number it needs to be, but I think there needs to be a regular process that's outside of just this budget process.
And how do we codify that through a board procedural, process or through,
We can put that into the document. If you want to let, the part that's in, you might say that we want a full report every quarter, right? There's gonna be some items in here that you might talk about every single board meeting for the next 6 months. Right, there clearly will be a few things that come back and forth, but you could get whatever pattern that you want. You can direct the chief to tell him, I want a full report every 3 months. I want a full report every month. There's only 23 action items. It's a key thing to think about. And we're trying not to make this a cumbersome document.
Yeah, I don't think it's testing, in my lens, it's not testing the initiative, the action items, as much as have we lost track of any initiatives that have emerged that should now be inserted in with its corresponding set of action items.
Yeah.
And things don't just change on the budget cycle. So I'm kind of a fan of, hey, every 3rd meeting or, basically once a quarter, we should have it on the agenda for the board, and the chief puts the agenda together, is, every 3 months, we can put it in the document that states that, that's what we're gonna do. And the board has a quick discussion on, has anything materially changed that says we need to address something in the strategic plan.
does that work for you, Chief?
It sure does.
Yeah.
Virginia, Chuck, or Rob, any thoughts on that process item there?
Well, so Gary, maybe, we do have
Maybe.
a budget cycle. Oh, sorry, did I interrupt someone?
Yeah, go ahead, then we'll go to Rob.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry,
It's
sorry,
hard to
Bob.
do.
Y'all are all
hard on Zoom.
4 of y'all are on a little screen here.
Okay, Virginia.
Should we tie it to the cycle of the budget? Like, there's like the first look, the second look, the third look, and the adoption. And I think that unless I misread it, I think that this draft document says that we should be looking that it's tied to the budget cycle. And I don't know, maybe we should be looking at it vis-a-vis the budget cycle.
I think the problem with that, Virginia, from my lens, just quick feedback is, that's a rolling process that leads to the budget. That's
That's
not a
true.
regular time
Yeah.
schedule.
Okay,
And I think we want to disconnect it from the budget cycle and have a discussion on a regular basis amongst the board about prioritization and focus and is anything missing? And I think, personally, I think we should do that outside of the budget cycle.
okay,
That's
that-
really what I was trying to communicate earlier about kind of disconnecting this from the budget cycle. I agree the budget cycle codifies it every year.
Yeah,
But-
the budget cycle determines what you're approving work on.
But not everything requires money.
Well, it requires time. I mean, most everything requires time and money, and honestly, that's part of it. Some are simpler than others, right?
Yeah.
However, I think it's really smart what you're describing to do is to just say that every quarter, we just wanna look at the global plan, separate from the budget, and say, are we still on track? Are the initiatives still good? Is there a new action item we need to bring in? Is there a new initiative? And every quarter you do that. That'll lend itself well then to say, okay, then when you roll in the budget, the chief's team says, you know, we have enough funds to do these things, we have enough time to make this happen. If you wanna move some of these other things faster, we need X.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, time, money, a time machine sometimes is valuable.
Is there generally consensus on that concept amongst the board members? Any major objection to that approach? Because otherwise I'll move on to Rob's comments and then on to yours, Chuck. But I'm just trying to focus, if there's more process discussion, let's have our process discussion.
Okay, Chuck.
All right, guess I'm playing devil's advocate, but I don't think our budget has one thing to do with a program or a goal or a mission or anything. I've been on the board since 2013. I don't think we've ever discussed a strategy or a goal as part of the budget. And the budget gets approved, so many firefighters. That's about 80% of the budget. So much
That's
fire
majority of the
protection. That's 10% of the budget. And then everybody else, well, that's 10% the end. We have never done that. And I think it's a good and even an interesting idea. But if you look at our budget, I don't think there's a single statement that would suggest a goal or a mission or a program. And if when we cut a program, you know what, the budget ends up being exactly the same because we don't fire anybody, we don't get rid of people. And we repurpose people or something, we just change their title and somehow that does it. I'm saying that because I'm listening to this discussion, it all sounds really like a textbook in the management school or something. But I don't think we're gonna be doing that ever. So unless we explicitly do that, and I don't know how, I mean, I know in other organizations how that's done, that you list some goals, you list some kind of some enabling statements about objectives that are part of those goals. And you do need to attach dollars, but our dollars don't change. If we changed our strategy, our dollars would be exactly the same. For no good reason, but I just don't feel like we're having a realistic discussion
I think
of what we're gonna do.
part of the problem is, and we need to do a better job communicating with the board, because when we are having our budget hearings, every program manager is obligated to give us program goals, how it meets our mission, what we're striving to achieve. And I think part of the challenge is when we come to the board, it doesn't have all of the detail that perhaps the board would like to hear. And so I think there are things that drive most of our budget requests that are related to our mission. And we just need to, now we hear that, figure out a way to communicate what those are.
Yeah, but I can give you an example, Mark, of where there's things in here that end up in having an effect on the budget. But I think, to Chuck's point, I do think a large part of this is disconnected from the budget cycle, but it becomes input into the budget cycle. So one is there's discussion about infrastructure, the IT infrastructure, ERP systems not inadequate. That is not something that if the board thinks that's an important topic, that is something that's gonna take budget. It's gonna take real dollars to go redo our IT infrastructure from an ERP system perspective. It's not a free process, but I think the problem that I've observed, and I've obviously been on much less time than you, is we try to rush all those discussions tied to the budget. It doesn't have everything we need to do, but we haven't really periodically through the year had discussions on those items to build up and to convey to the chief and to the staff. Brandon, we know you have priorities, but the board sees these things as really important.
Okay, let me
And so
add-
there's a little
can I
bit
add
of
on
a
to-
disconnect.
Can I add on to that? Up until last year, the budget for us was one page. The whole thing was on one page, and we voted up or down, the end. I'm just saying,
That wasn't the case since I've been.
we had 1 month to do it. And we had the sunshine, I mean, now there's been some improvements, we now have maybe 2 months in a good year, but,
Yeah, I wanna be careful that we're not trying to redo the budget strategy. If we wanna redo the budget strategy, I think the finance committee next year should go off and talk about how you want the budget process to run. But this relates, you've kind of linked the two together. And I think the spirit of what I'm hearing from Chuck, from myself, is let's disconnect it from the budget. Let's disconnect the strategic, not divorce it from it, but not have that be the budget, be the driving force of it.
I think, if I may,
Go ahead.
my own opinion, that every item that's up to the initiative is gonna require money. Somebody's gonna have to do it. If you pay them to do it, now you got volunteer services coming, you're gonna have to pay. So to me, those are clearly, dollars and cents up there that should be folded into our budget if they're not already in the budget. In some of those areas, whether it has enough money is the question. But I assume that each one of those 5 initiatives will have some dollars and cents attached to it, and if somebody is gonna be responsible for it.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with it. I'm just saying by the time we see the budget, that train left the station already, by the time we get to the budget. If we want to impact more of the formulation of the budget based on these priorities, then it's incumbent upon the board to have a more frequent discussion.
Absolutely, and it's a prior discussion before final discussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're really on a similar page. And if I were to reframe it for you,
Sure.
just to say more in a work on the strategic plan as a strategic plan and keep it current and keep looking at it, visit every quarter. And then through the budget process, decide what you're gonna fund or not fund.
But
That's fundamentally where it is.
that's a tough decision to make when we're
If you're not-
squeezed against the end of the fiscal year
And
to
would-
sunshine the new budget.
And you wouldn't be as much.
Right.
When you're revisiting this
Totally agree.
consistently. And then when you get into that space, the reason I like embedding it in the budget is it's a public facing document that's using their money. And you're telling them what you're doing with it, what your initiatives are. So you're bringing all that work you did every quarter. And then you're dropping it into the budget saying, we're gonna fund these things this year.
Yeah.
And I think you're actually saying pretty close to the same thing. You're just saying, I don't want that to be the only source of review of the strategic plan.
I think somewhere between now and wherever that time is, that somewhere it would be helpful for me to see a progressive timeline of how these things will fold into each other to end up at the end of the day, we got a budget. And I don't know what that will look like. I'm a person who believes in calendars, and spot reading the calendars and watching that progression go. So I don't know if that's feasible or not, but I think it would probably be helpful. So we kind of understand along the way, if somebody needs to yell at a certain point in time, they know when they need to yell at that point in time. Not the person yelling, but make whatever comments or revision that we made based on adding something or taking something away.
Yeah, I think what's missing is there is timeline in here on each of the objectives. But I think in reviewing the document, at least for me, I didn't focus that heavily on timeline. But that does kind of help set the priorities, because if it's not in this next fiscal year, then that suggests staff has deprioritized it. It's not one of the top issues of the day.
My thing, and I'm looking at time, I said 26, 27. That's the over
Fiscal years.
fiscal year. I'm talking within the fiscal year. There are processes that need to take place in order to kind of arrive at the end of the fiscal year, which is at either budget time or at that point in time, or at the early part. But there are things that go on throughout the year that if some type of timeline may be a good way to kind of know where the benchmarks are and where the checkpoints are along the way, so we begin to see, check those things off, to see, are we progressing towards that end?
And the detail from my view comes from the person who's in charge of that action item. Knows, okay, we're gonna move forward with it this fiscal year. They start to break it down into the step-by-step steps, the process. And then I can anticipate them coming to you on issues and saying, each of the persons that are responsible for an action item, telling me those steps, where those fit. We did not take the time to break those steps down to that detail in the workshop, or we would have never completed our task.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's kind of the chief's job,
Yeah,
right, is to
I
manage
think it's
the,
not only
to
the
manage
chiefs,
the execution of the strategic plan
and,
is
yeah,
on the chief, it's
and
not
I think
on
the
the
people
board.
that raised
We're
their
here to
hand
monitor
said,
his work.
I'll take
So-
responsibility for that action item, are taking ownership of the Gantt chart they need to build out to meet it and get it done for that fiscal year.
And that's the whole thing, that, the chief does it, but I think it's important, if we have concerns about something as a board member, we need to, like Chuck mentioned, that, hey, up top the budget at the end of the year, and, you trying to figure out, we didn't have the time to look at it, or the process wasn't adequate enough for us to make our input. I'm just saying, what is that Gantt chart gonna look like for the year? And are the checkpoints that we're talking about included in there? And if it is, then as a board member, then I won't get so excited about knowing the fact that is it gonna be in there? I can maybe take a deep breath and say, we're gonna get to it. And if necessary, refer people back to the chart so that make sure that they can feel a little at ease with things.
He also has it under implementation and updates. The only thing that's not in there is the aspect of either semi-annual or quarterly, or you have that pretty much.
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm on the draft that the chief says.
I know, or what page?
It's up towards the top.
Yeah.
This is implementation and updates on page
Yeah.
4.
You have that there.
Yeah.
The only thing you haven't really outlined is the timeline specifically. Should it be, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually, and the foundation actually, we already have the foundation every year as to what baseline is for what's already been established. And then after that, the areas of initiation that the chief feels will be new programs or existing programs. And then as Chuck says, moving the money around relative to what plans are prioritized by the chief, and the evaluation and review process, which would be either that quarterly or semi-annually process. So it's there, it's just, we gotta kind of like shake it up a little bit and throw it on the table so we can.
Well, I think it's there for how the chief and the team that put it all together wants to administer the process. What I think is surfacing here is the process for the board is not defined. And that's what I'm trying to bring in the
Kind of
play
is, because
here.
we approve the budget that the chief presents.
Yeah, but I think we're all saying we're uncomfortable with an annual
yeah.
look at budget time.
So I added a bullet to that implementation and updates that gets you to that quarterly.
Yeah, can you just add timeline in there, the initiatives, action items and timeline, including the consideration of new items? And then we'll have captured Robert's point of view on that. Does the board agree with that general statement there that he's added? I think it's a good add.
You see it, Virginia?
Yeah, I think that's a great add.
Chuck?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think, what Gary said about uncoupling budget and strategic plan is important for right now. That is, I think we need to develop something, we need to have some goals, we need to figure out what it might cost to do those things. And we need a budget. At some point, that's gonna come together.
Converge.
But it's not now. And I think we can't wait a whole year for something to happen. And as I look at these things, we got money coming out of our ears. There's almost nothing that we couldn't fund mid-year and have no problem. I mean, there's probably something, we wanna build a $50 million complex. Yeah, that would take more than we have spare. But other than that, anything 5, 10 million, we're already projecting a surplus of $10 million or something like that, or 5, whatever it is, it's not a problem, so we can deal with it at any time. Any case, I think we really ought to focus on this and then figure out how we bring that into a regular cycle.
I think what is interesting and really a great opportunity is, so often when the budget comes and I'm presenting it, it's what we all internally had said is important, and there's not an opportunity for the board to have input to say what is important to them throughout the year, and I think these quarterly meetings will allow us to do that. For example, we just had a robust conversation about ISO at the last meeting, right? A lot of board interest in that. There could be conversations, we may, during one of our quarterly meetings, talk about the impacts of staffing on our score and what, part of that may be a board priority and direction to consider adding some sort of staffing, in a future budget process to allow us to score higher. In which case, and you would see it in the next proposed budget, and it wouldn't be my idea, it would be our, or your idea. So I think it'll be a great opportunity for us to have those conversations. So it's kind of that budget that's all of ours.
Yeah, it's always a balance, it's a good observation, it's always a balancing act for boards, right? It's you don't wanna be calling the shots and running the day-to-day operations and down in that level of detail. And at the same time, you don't wanna be an absentee board member where you're just going through the motions of a regular board meeting and a regular process. I think doing this quarterly, doing what you just said for you to bring some of those initiatives forward into these quarterly discussions, that kind of eliminates the notion that it's a spectator board versus a board being active at the right level. We're not gonna tell you how to do it, but you're raising the, hey, if you want to materially change it, this is what this looks like.
Yeah, and let me add too, I think you're bringing up an important area, like the ISO example, because that's one of those things where I think we like to think about, oh, it's one big happy family and we're all marching in the same direction. But clearly in the ISO report, there were some issues with staffing and training and what we were doing, which may be something staff doesn't want to talk about, or maybe, I don't know what the issues really are, but it may be something they don't want to do, they don't like, I don't know what the issue is, but we may need to butt heads on some of these things and figure out what can be done. And anyway, I think it's an opportunity to actually have a meaningful discussion, which we've never had time to do.
And it's a really hard document in order to decipher. I mean, we were trying to put all the points and everything together and trying to figure out, well, why we're short here, why we're short there. And John goes, well, you can't figure it that way. And
Okay, I'm gonna make a time-based recommendation here, which is unless anybody else has a burning desire to have more discussion on the process, then we should move on to the next phase of the content. And so that we can have some time for the prioritizations. Is everyone okay with that? We're not hearing any, but back to you.
No, this is really healthy, very important discussion.
It
It
is.
will make a difference. What I'd like to move into is let's talk about initiative 1. Service to the community and know that the team did a really good job. One of the things that I pushed really hard on is when we talk about the things that get done in the organization, that you talk about the value, and the value has to be directly to the community. Now, how does this bring value to the community? Not is it fun to do as a firefighter, not is it hard to do, but does it provide value? And so a lot of where this fit was wordsmithing the action item to where it allowed them to move forward, who's gonna actually do it, and then what fiscal year should it be happening in, right? So when we look at service, and these are in absolutely no order. So if you wanna reorder these, feel free. These almost came as the discussion continued through the day, right? And to get to a spot. So do you have any issues, concerns, wordsmithing that you'd like to see on these action items? Then, of course, I'll also ask you if, is there something missing in service to the community that you see maybe as a weakness of the organization?
Yeah, so my comment on this is, I had writing up the top good solid list. So I think it's, and that was the case, I think, in every category. My editorial comment is, where you have responsible people, in all cases, I would eliminate names and put positions.
We almost every time did, except there were a few people that were specific to names.
But they may not be next year.
I totally get it. And
Can we reorganize? I mean,
and
a captain that's a training officer one year may not be the captain that's a training officer the next year.
Some of them were people specific who had experience in the topic, and let's talk about those as we get.
That was my.
There were a couple of times when we ended up putting a name down that there was no title, it was just that individual has history and knowledge about it, and I think in those cases, I think they were not necessarily the only person on the list, but let's look at that.
Okay.
Let's walk through that, because I'm with you, you put the title down, you put the person with the responsibility, not the name of the individual.
And then the only other edit I had, and then we'll circle through the board, was, and I'm purely about the service to the community, is I do believe the performance metrics on the ambulance should have the fire chief involved in that one.
Okay.
So I think given 90+% of our calls, are EMS related, it just seems like working on the thing we do the most of makes sense.
Do you want to just lead that, or do you want to put all the names in there, chief?
You can add me to that.
I would just, yeah, it was an ad. I wasn't suggesting you take away the others. It's just to bring emphasis that says this is the top level of, kind of critical for the chief. It's,
Yeah.
like I said, it's 80 to 90% of what we do.
I have a question. I'm absolutely not sure what item number D, what that really identify and implement strategies to enhance community engagement and awareness. I'm not sure what strategy there are, if there are any strategies. I understand identifying. So what I guess that's a process question.
What got that there?
What got it there?
Using.
Or it needs to be more specific.
Yeah, no, I can see that. The topic came from we didn't have a lot of engagement, for instance, from Atherton. We didn't have a lot of engagement from some of the community portions. The community's strength and weaknesses talked about the fact that there's some good things that the district's doing, but they're having a hard time reaching more people. And they want more general community engagement with the district and awareness of what's going on with the district. So we could add some words that might make that a little more clear. This may have been one of those that was really clear to us in the moment because we were in the thick of the discussion.
I'm glad you said what you did, because I assumed it was something different.
Yeah.
So,
Chief, does that fit that?
Yeah, it covers so many different things related to connecting with our community. Some of it is emergency preparedness.
yeah,
Some of it is
nice.
figuring out, some of it's hands-only CPR. Some of it is figuring out how do we message with our people and actually connect with them. Some of it was conversations about, trying to remember what our SMC alert is, actually proactively going out and getting people to sign up. It involved just about everything you could imagine, like getting more volunteers, getting more service members, all of those things. Kind of in that, it's a very generic broad broad statement, but it's everything that will help us kind of in that new program that we have.
Yeah, I think the reason I jumped to EPRUP is because it was assigned to a risk reduction officer. But it sounds like it's an overall
Yeah,
communication, engagement, it's much broader from what you're describing, much broader set of things, not specific, just emergency.
And it's one of those that's gonna get very granular as the person starts tackling those issues and identifies all the items that they're going to work on.
We work on the wording on that one.
Absolutely.
I think,
I think
I
Robert.
think, so, you know, to me, it goes a little bit deeper, with broader, I'm not sure, than, emergency preference to be at the heart of that. I think a lot of it has to do with, communication. I think, I hate to use this term, there's a lot of marketing that needs to go on and understanding of what the fire district does, and being celebratory of those good things that are going on. Because most of the, if you ask the average person in my community, they don't really know what the fire district really does, other than they see the fire truck going by on emergency.
Don't speak on that.
Yeah, beyond that point, they really don't know. So I asked myself, well, what, you know, I mean, I know because I'm here. And I think part of my reaction to that is that if I wasn't here, I would probably be part of that number in the community that really don't know. So to me, that's gonna take a little bit more, and using vehicles to make that happen, like the certain groups or groups that are considered themselves part of that disaster preparedness activity and organization, to kind of figure out a way to work with those bodies of individuals in messaging to the community, because those individuals are respected in the community for what they do. And most of the time, people in the neighborhoods recognize those individuals. So understanding how to make those connections through the community about certain things that this district is doing and will be doing, that's going to benefit the community, because there are some good things that the district is doing that the community, I think, overall really don't know. And that's an enhancement of our position within the community, I think, that somehow what I heard a couple of years ago that was missing from that, and part of down through the years up until now is one of how to draw that EPRUP group into educate them in a way that they can begin to educate the community. And I hate to say this, but it's gonna take money to do that. I mean, but that whatever that is, it's gonna take it in order to do it. I mean, people will voice their opinions about it if anybody listens. But I think other ways of getting the information out there to people in the community is gonna be important.
So I put a couple of words up there, see if that
Under risk,
is getting you closer to.
under your risk reduction officer too, I know that that individual interacts with the different volunteer groups or the head of the different volunteer groups in order to come up with would be to identify and implement strategies to enhance community engagement. I think there needs to be something in there that involves those volunteer groups that deal with the risk reduction officer too. And I don't know how we do that. I know we don't have, do we have an advisory panel with the volunteer groups that meets with our reduction coordinator?
I don't know who specifically needs what the letter for group is, but I mean, there is, even though it's not specifically in there, we know those are our marching orders, and we've heard that enough time that it needs to be, you know, our relationship with those groups.
Well, it's kind of an implied intent
Yeah,
relative that they do the interaction.
Yeah, it's a collaborative thing. We've heard that it needs to be a bottom up, top down kind of organizational structure. And then I will also say, with each and every one of these where it has a responsible person, that's going to be the lead. And in the case, you know, with risk reduction officer 2, whoever's in that position is going to be going through both John and myself in this. So my fingerprints will likely be on almost all these. I can't imagine that it would be on any of these, but, just so you have an awareness of that. So these things are not going on in a vacuum.
We just want a specific person to point to that's guiding it, or if it's a team of sorts, it doesn't happen. But does that get, I just threw some initial.
Can we add on the community engagement with a comma and do something about communication? So it's not just awareness, it's our overall communication strategy is generally pretty soft, pretty weak.
Okay.
You know, and it's kind of, if I was running a company, I'd be looking, going, hey, my VP of marketing is not doing their job, they're not getting our message out. You know, and we have lots of room to improve, to communicate better with the community. And so for me, communication is important.
Maybe something in your, and communications comma, evaluation of outreach programs and awareness, something like that, in order to make them a stakeholder. Even though they're not an employee of the fire district, but make them a stakeholder in the decision-making process as to what they feel is important.
Okay.
Does that belong here, or does that belong in the detailed plan that the chief comes back to the board with for implementation?
I think it needs to be in there because that's the reason why we have the community engagement, is to deal with the volunteer groups. And they should have a say.
Yeah, I think
Even though it's an implied consent, basically, that they do through the risk reduction officer. But I just think it should be in there where they're a stakeholder.
Yeah, I think the reason, Rob, I struggle with it a little bit is that's a subset of the group we're trying to communicate to. I actually think we do a reasonable job talking to our to the active volunteer community. This is the broader, this is our constituents. This is the residents throughout the fire district that we don't send very much information out to them. They, and I think it was mentioned somewhere, I forget where it was, newsletter, that kind of thing. We don't do a very good job of communicating more broadly. So that's what I'm trying to do, is you're trying to get, I think what you've said is, this is the overall communication strategy for the district.
Yeah.
And I think, in a way, this item should just probably be completely reworded to be, dramatically improve the overall communication strategy within the external facing communication strategy for the district.
I think we do a pretty good job with outreach to the community through social media. I mean, pretty much every time I open up Instagram, you've got some type of a program there where it's either CPR or cadet program or employment. I think we do really well that way.
I don't think there's consensus from the board on that report card.
Let's go back to the.
Well, that's yours, but I
Let's-
wanna make sure we get the wording.
Let's get the wording right, but I'd like the chief to weigh in and I'll grab what you guys. He's got to direct this one, but we can also turn it into 2 action items if you need to, right? Because there's no handcuffs here. So what,
We're doing handcuff.
I think, I think from what I'm hearing, that needs to be broadened to include certain things. I just want to make sure it includes all of the things. We do have some challenges with our communications for those that aren't actively looking for the communication. We have challenges in preparing our community for those that aren't members of our volunteer groups in it. We have some challenges in community resiliency and preparedness that's on us to deal with. So it needs to kind of cover all of those things under that umbrella, right? So it's the whole thing to make sure that whoever is in our district and whoever works for our district is that we're ready for whatever happens to happen tomorrow, right?
Can I suggest that we flag this for work after the meeting between you and the chief?
Sure.
I don't think we should try to fix it.
TBA.
I don't think we should try to fix wordsmith and fix it here. You've got the sense,
But if you.
I think you've got a broad sense from the board,
If what I just said resonates with everyone, I mean, we'll figure out,
how to word that.
something that covers all that.
That's a risk reduction officer too, that you can have her work on.
Yeah. I don't know if it belongs here or not, but one of the things that we don't have that I think, two people can disagree because we're not talking about apples to apples. I think what we're missing here is some sort of goals. And when we talk about community engagement, we ought to have some idea what that means. How do you measure it? And I think this is two things. One is we ought to have some goals. In other words, if our goal is to have people have carbon monoxide detectors, we ought to have a goal. I mean, maybe that should be 30%, we're happy with that. Maybe it should be 70%, we're happy with that. I don't know what it should be. But we ought to have some idea of what we want, and then we ought to have some sort of professional assistance in measuring these things. What do we want in terms of awareness? What do we want in terms of action? And we don't have anything, so two people can see the same facts and disagree because they use the words differently. And one of the things that I found, well, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, I worked with one of the fire, the division chiefs to put together a communication plan. And the board approved it, $500,000 approved. And the staff never did anything because they didn't want to do it. And somebody told me later they didn't want to be nailed for what if we didn't meet the goals? And there was kind of a fear of not meeting the goals. Well, that's a wrong approach. That is, you might not meet the goals, but you've learned something, you found out something, you change your goals, you change your tactics or something. But I think that was all right, but people were just afraid, and so the staff did what they just buried it. They don't care what they didn't then, I don't know now if they care what the board says or not. But anyway, I think we ought to need some goals and we need some professionals to help us with that. Because I don't think somebody who's good at building codes knows anything about measuring community engagement.
So Virginia, I want to give you a chance to jump in, just so you're not muted out on Zoom there, and then we'll go to Robert.
I'm just listening to all of this. So, I mean, I think that a lot of things that are being said make a lot of sense. I also think that maybe offline the chief, needs to do, or whoever needs to work on some of the wording, but I'm just listening, Gary.
Okay.
Thanks.
So we're still on item number D. I just want to have one more stab at trying to understand. The word that stands out to me in that whole identify and implement strategies and this is what really kind of got me stumped now, enhance community engagement and work. The enhancement, I don't know what that means. And I think being able to flush out, I think that's when the kind of hidden or the alligator in the room or in the lake for many years that I've been on the board trying to understand what that enhancement really is. And maybe each one of us may have a different idea of what that is, but until we can kind of figure out really what that is, we don't know what we have gotten there. We have arrived yet.
Yes.
You're making a case on why I think the chief needs an opportunity to reword this.
And I
I don't think the wording's working for anybody.
And I think maybe, but there's a qualifier to these goals.
think part of
that enhancement.
part of that wordsmith, I mean, we used a few different words through that process, right? And I think one of you said it really well, is there's a few things that are working well and a few things that are not. What I think the team didn't want to say was to develop, which infers that there's nothing in place. And I think enhance was chosen to say that, you know, there's some things that are going well, some things that need to be better. Let's get in and enhance it to make it better. And I think we can work on some wordsmithing on that to get it more specific. It's also, I think, really healthy to know that this is an important one for you. Right, so it's good for us to work on and get it, and it may come back to you as 2 action items, it may come back as a single, if we we'll see where that lands.
So don't get me wrong, the word enhance, I'm okay,
But it doesn't tell you what the specific.
it doesn't tell me what it is, so, and it's hard to kind of agree with something, oh yeah, let's go with it, I don't know what it is, I don't know what it is. That may be one thing, or it may be multiple things, it kind of makes me think what.
It was such a broad action item that it was gonna be hard to.
Chief, is this where the kind of disaster communications falls into?
I mean,
As well.
probably all of, so many things fall under this umbrella, and it's, I don't know that we can list the things, because I think some of the things we don't even know what they are yet. But we need to, we know we're missing the mark. And we know we need to fix it, and what the solution is, I think in some areas we have some ideas, in some areas we don't know yet. So,
So is this one where in one of the quarterly reviews, you'd come back with let's spend an hour on that at a board meeting and have a discussion about it and then present a strategy for it? To me, we're kind of fixing the issue that I'm hearing as an overtone. Chuck mentioned it, well, this happened 7 years ago and then, a plan was built, nothing happened. It's like, what I'm trying to focus on is make sure we have the board processes to allow that focus to come back to the board. And I think it's incumbent upon the board on an item like this. I think we should get the wording right. But then I think ultimately in one of those regular reviews, this is a good case example of where the chief coming back with a full discussion on the strategy in this area makes sense. And long before the budget process. Because the strategy, if the board agrees to a strategy, then he can go add up the cost to deliver that strategy. But right now, if we're not decoupled from the budget process, we just see a number for it with no idea of how that's going to solve the problem.
And I think with that solving that problem, that's where it falls back into what we were talking about earlier, in terms of how we communicate to the community. But there's things that we're enhancing or where it's gonna look like. And these are the things that we are shooting for. So that people can feel like, oh yeah, okay, now I feel like, the district is working with me now at this point in time.
yeah, and I think this is all gonna be, kind of, incremental over the 5 years, and some of these things we may solve the problem, some of them is gonna be going on long after we're all gone, because what we're attempting to do, especially in this area, is just continuously make it better than it currently is. And I'm not sure, with time and technology, some of the solutions may change too.
Yeah, I think just the board seeing an outline of the strategy of how you're going to achieve it.
Sure.
Because I think that we could probably have a similar discussion on many of these items. But I think that's, to me, where that board process comes into play is that these are things that should, if nothing significant is missing from the list of, 21 items, I think? 23, if nothing significant is missing, then it's incumbent upon the board to spend time on 1 or 2 of them every meeting and have a deeper dialogue on each of them.
And it'll also help the staff to know, as they go down that road, what's the right road?
Yeah.
And as they build that out, very good. But now at least there's a road that's in their mind and that you're moving down.
Can we talk about F next?
About which one?
F.
No, we have not talked about that,
I don't-
other than to add fire chief to the list there, but go ahead. We can move on to that.
Well, I was concerned about the timeline, 26, 27. This is an issue. I mean, I'm one of those people that thinks we ought to resolve it next month. It can't wait to 26, 27, I don't think, because there's politics going on around it. And I think it needs to be moved up. And again, some of the wording has implications where we want to improve service. Well, we may want to get rid of the provider and do something entirely different. And we need to have that conversation because the wheels are already in motion. Stuff. Decisions are being made now.
But for 26, 27, then focusing on get the metrics to have the discussion seems to me the thing that the missing ingredient is.
Well, I think it'll be too late. Why not move it up to 24, 25? is what I'm
Well, they
saying.
actually have a 4-year contract, Chuck. So it's actually up to 27, right, Chief?
29 is when the contract expires.
Oh, 29, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a number of challenges, and I think some of them, we talked about maybe at the last meeting where exploring some legal opinions as to what our rights are as a special district and ambulance transport. Even though some of these things may have a fiscal year that's out 2 years, understand that there is still work that's ongoing in the interim and even at board direction, like the conversation we had previously, I think at our last meeting about engaging legal counsel, spending some money and getting a legal opinion on what our rights are as a special district can happen now. So, but some of that stuff, even though this is the timeline for this, broader concept, I'm gonna have those conversations with our attorneys.
Why not put 24, 25? What does it hurt us to move that up to suggest that this is really urgent?
Do you mean 25, 26, Chuck? Cause we're almost in 25.
Well, but we're in the fiscal year right now of 24, 25, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that what we call it?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's true.
How do we decide which houses, if all of them are burning down? How do we decide which one? We gotta figure out.
Perfect analogy for our role.
I mean, when I look at each one of them has their own, there's some burning issues going on. So how do we get to that point? Do the board kind of say, oh, shoot the darts up against the wall and go that direction? Or do we try to figure out a much more sane way to try to figure out, how prioritize or which house we want to put out for? Well, I don't know. I don't know how we get to that point.
But what I'm concerned about is when we say 26, 27, somebody could view that as maintain the status quo, make no changes, because by the time we get there, it'll be too late to do anything.
I think once we figure out, once each one of these get flushed out, because there's a flushing out that needs to go on in everything that's here. I think in the conversation we have had, and until some of those get flushed out a little bit more in terms of looking at all the problems, the possible problems, the solution to the problem, you really can't tell which one is burning up the most, the quickest. I mean, all of them are important. for sure.
I think you're onto something, Robert. I think the board needs to do a prioritization process. I don't think it's gonna happen tonight, just realistically.
It can change.
But I think one of the early discussions next year for the board should be coming back to this document and at least picking the top 5 out of all of these and saying, hey, these are the 5 the board has the most passion about. I think trying to order them 1, 2, 3, 4 is gonna be very difficult, but kind of putting them in categories that said, hey, yeah, to your point, these are the issues that are the burning issues for the board and giving the chief clarity of, which items on this list of a laundry list of things to be done. Board has the most passion about it.
Otherwise known as these are the buildings on fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, what does the
Let's give the
timeline?
chief, let's ask the chief his top 3, and we can table it for next time for a discussion of.
I'd have to go through all of them
Yeah.
and prioritize them, but.
Exactly what the timeline means. In other words, is that when we're no longer going to discuss it? Or is what?
No, when we were sitting in the room, I think we were all just considering, there is underlying efforts that are moving forward with each and every one of these every day. But as we were trying to figure out, just with our current workloads, when we would, I don't even wanna say have everything resolved, because some of these things will be ongoing for the rest of our careers here. But when we could identify specific initiatives, bring them to the board, talk about them, request monies in the budget, those were kind of the years. And they were just, those us sitting in a room talking about it. And like, I think, like Dan has been saying, is this is a living document, and at any time during one of our quarterly meetings with the board and reviewing this, the board can articulate what the priorities are. And, you know, if they want something done, you know, by the next quarter, we can shift and pivot and move our workload and talk about budget strategies and prioritize those things.
So let me just give Virginia.
Gary?
a chance. Her hand's been up for about 10 minutes. Go ahead, Virginia.
Well, no, I'm just piggybacking off of Chuck's thing with regard to the timeline, but I wasn't gonna focus on the ambulance provider, but rather the dispatch system. Because we know that the contract has expired now, but it's been for 5 years. And I mean, to me, that's, yeah, I don't know what kind of movement there is or what we need to be looking at, because we've discussed it briefly as a board, but I do think that, and you know, I think Rob right now is on that committee for the JPA. And, you know, maybe y'all will have a meeting, Rob, just because it's the beginning of the year and you need to get a new chair and vice chair or whatever of that JPA. But, you know, it just seems like that timeline for item E should be 24, 25. And it should, you know, that's to me, a high priority, especially since the contract has expired.
I think Rob was onto a good idea, which is, let's let the chief come back to us with a prioritization of what your top handful are.
Okay.
I'll leave it to the chief to say, is it 3, is it 5? And then come back to the board in one of our meetings early next year and kind of say, hey, let's continue the discussion on
Okay,
this.
that-
And
that-
here's
that's
the
fine.
ones.
That,
But
that's fine.
I don't think it's going to, I'll just reiterate what I said a few minutes ago, and I just don't think we're gonna figure it out tonight. With
No,
limited time.
no, but
I think we need a recommendation from the chief, and then we can kind of kick that around and say, hey, does anybody see that differently?
I'd like to recommend something though from a process standpoint. I think each of these things have different action items that are being contemplated. So like the chief just mentioned with the last one here, hired an attorney and finding out what's going on, that's something like right away. But solving the whole problem is not necessarily right away. So maybe it would be helpful if we could have not a huge number, but 2 or 3 critical action items for each of these. And have timetables associated with the action items. Anyway, but otherwise, I think the timeline doesn't mean anything. If we're hurrying to do something right now, but we've got a 2-year date on it, it doesn't.
And I would suggest there are probably some items in here that have some really critical, time-sensitive underlying issues, like we're just talking about with the ambulances, that would apply to that and maybe a couple others, but not everyone. But I will go through there and think about those and come up with a list. And like I said, if the board is, well, I'll do a little research and see if it's within my spending limits, but I can engage with Steve, and I know another company that specializes in these issues related to ambulances, and engage them next week, yeah, kind of thing. And start getting some answers.
The best part of this report was under challenges, where there's between the series of strengths and weaknesses, you broke down internal and external. I think that was very valuable, even though some were cognitive and some were effective. But it was the identification from the individuals within the organization that identified the strengths and the weaknesses. And I think that was the sort of, I would consider one of the better parts of the report, so thank you for that.
The team was wonderful, but honestly.
Yeah, I think, Chief, it's gonna be safe to say that the highest priority items are to continue to fall to the service to the community. You know, things that affect service, when the team implements a new ERP system to fix that challenge, and, when the team, identifies the key policies, expands the intent and leaders and for policies, those kinds of things, I think are gonna fall more on the day-to-day operations, but the things that are really affecting overall. And the only one that I saw outside of the service to the community that kind of raises very high on the list, and I think you've heard it from the board, is probably workforce demographic section, having to do with the DEI initiatives that the board has stated, I think more than once the desire to have, more diversity in the team and everything else, and kind of the ongoing work there. But otherwise, I don't think the prioritization is as complex as prioritizing 23, because I think some of these areas are more internal operations focused. And I think the board should feel comfortable deferring those to you as the operations leader. When it comes to the, how are we servicing the community, that's, needless to say, what the board probably should be most heavily focused on.
What? Do you want to move to two?
I think we can safely move to 2. I'm just trying to keep my eye on the clock here.
No, I think that's good, and I think, some strategic plans, you see an incredible amount of detail that go into the task, right? I'm not a fan of those to do that in the global plan. I'm a fan of making a statement, giving a lead, and letting them build out the details to those steps that can then get brought to you at different times, or will never get done. And it'll be a 60-page document that no one will.
Well, what I do like about your structure here too is you're assigning it to various individuals throughout. Because it'd be very easy to just put the fire chief next to all of these.
Because he knows he's on every.
But it's kind of like, but in a typical structure, different people take on different things. Yeah, certainly in the corporate world, different, the CFO owns certain kinds of tasks, the marketing person owns certain kinds of tasks.
Yeah.
No different here in a fire agency.
Some feedback for you too from that group is the group was really engaged. A large group, very willing to put their hand up, very interested. Certain pieces had more passion than others, but the people that have names on here understand it, accepted it, owned it, put a time to it. That's extraordinarily powerful to carry forward with. So under leadership, they really, again, these were things identified by the group to relate to pieces. The C was an interesting one. We finally came to the word demotivators as a way, right?
Because it's a good term, because we've talked about that.
Because it really hits, everything from some of the challenges you have with Petra to people wanting to climb off of an engine and work on an engine to someone wanting to, go to a different position, identify all those things and then bring some plans in place to figure out how to deal with that.
And what was the thought on the last one of putting an individual's name there versus position?
Oh, Brett was just a highly engaged person that was very interested in doing it. So the ops chief was gonna have it, and I think Brett raised his hand and said, I'd like to be part of that too. So,
In some ways, it was a bit of a respect to someone who individually wanted to be a part of it, but the focus is on the ops chief.
but I think, and I don't know if it's in every case, if there's an actual name in there. I know there's also a position, so we may have to add somebody to Randy Kelly. In the absence of.
Yeah, that's a
President,
good,
fired,
that's a
so
good
we're not-
example of that's really not Captain Kelly, it's the training
Yeah,
captain.
right, and we,
That,
So who's the administration director?
but we do have, it's interesting, you end up with people that happen to have a specific passion or desire that's
Yeah,
very specific to them and not a position.
Sometimes that responsibility follows them to different positions because of the
Dave
passion.
Magnan,
anybody have other comments on section 2?
Gonna do.
Go ahead.
3/4 of these are immediate timelines. And coincidentally, all relate to the staff. The one was the community, those have 2 years out kind of thing, but the staff, we're gonna do that right away. And this is where I think there's a conflict of interest between the staff involved in the planning and why the board has kind of been pushed out of the process. Because I think in many ways, the staff would really like to run the whole process. So in any case, I think it looks bad. The cosmetics are terrible in my opinion.
I don't understand what you're talking about, sir. You said looking at the timeline?
Yeah, look at the timeline. All this stuff, 3 out of 4 are gonna get done next year. And there are things that in a way, I don't see as serious problems. I don't see that to be solved instantly.
I don't see that. I see, like, for example, workforce initiative, I see one in 25, 26. And I saw one next one, organization culture and professional development. There's one that focuses in on 25, 26. And then looked at an operational structure. There was one that stated 25, 26. So
I'm talking about number two, I'm talking about number two here.
I think this is more having to do with tactical operational issues versus big strategic goals.
I
And
think,
it goes back to what I said earlier, which is the big strategic goals for the board is always going to be service to the community. Yeah, these are a lot of these leadership ones and how the internal systems work and all that. That's the operational side of how are we going to get the job done. But the ones the board is naturally going to prioritize to is going to be service to the community.
I see your point, but I also think that this list is significantly simpler items than the other list. The other
Tactical
list-
versus strategic.
The other list is gonna have 15 or 20 subsets to it. Some of these are gonna be done fairly quickly.
But they're being presented as if they're kind of co-equal here, so I think it's a mistake, but anyway. Unfortunately, I think, compensation and benefits have been the most important topics that the board has voted on for the time I've been on the board.
Well, none of these are, I don't see where it, maybe I'm losing them, I don't see anything about compensation. About, tasks and.
No, I just said, I think the staff is focused on the staff. And I think it's,
I appreciate that, but I'm not speaking as a person who's been a part of this, I didn't see that. I understand what you're saying, I can totally see where you get that. I didn't see that in this group. I saw partly that fact of the reason why you see initiative 1 and 1. And the reason there were so many more of those in that initiative was, I do think that group was very focused on their service level. To that. Were there anything in 2 that you'd want to wordsmith or change, or are you good with those? Good with those?
Virginia, you good with 2? Yeah.
And
Anybody
then,
else?
Yes.
I think you move on to 3.
3 is the demographic piece, and this was a lot of really good discussion and the desire to, to create a reflection of the demographics of the community, which is diversity without using the word diversity.
I think it's better wording than
Yeah.
DEI has become almost
It's
kind of
not-
a negative
yeah.
connotation in the world and
Whereas the real target of it is to
Yeah.
reflect the community.
so on this one, my only comment is I was really happy to see this as a top level initiative that came back from the team.
Yeah.
That they put a priority to it and it was to Rob's point about in the weaknesses and strengths and everything else, a lot of input into this was identified in that section as well. So there's clearly, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm really happy that there's some internal passion towards this enough to make it a top level initiative. So,
There was quite a bit of time in this with them. I would argue there is definite support for this landing. I'm assuming we're good with 3,
anybody have anything else on 3? Okay, let's move on to 4.
and then 4,
So I had a couple of questions on 4. The first one is, I don't know what JLMC is on the first item for the responsible. Is that a person or?
Joint Labor Management Committee, we have those with all of our labor organizations.
Okay,
So really, that's just us ensuring that as we start having a conversation about inclusion and belonging training, that we're getting the buy-in from our labor groups to
okay.
partners with us.
So can we change that to like labor group or something
Sure.
that's more, since it's going to be a public document?
can I just put joint, I just spelled it out.
Okay, and then the other one that I just don't understand it, I guess, maybe I'm lame, is item C. Key policies and expand the intent and the leader's intent style for policies and procedures. I've read that 5 times and have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, just not to be,
Yeah.
maybe I'm lame, but.
I agree, Gary. And is it a typo? Is
I
there a
do.
type?
Don't know what
It's
that,
it's a drive in the fire service related to mission driven culture, and I think you're right, we're reading this outside of that thumbnail. You might argue, maybe it isn't quite as correct.
it sounds like something that's a concept of a plan.
We can, it's better, well, it's a little bit better than the concept of the plan, but we can rewrite that in layperson terms, so the community that's reading this understands. what we're doing.
And the board,
And
Discretion functionality, maybe? I don't know, you guys would know better.
so again, you said it was the mission driven culture, is that what I?
Yeah, and leader's intent, most policies kind of start out with the intent. This is designed to tell you when to do why, and then it spells out the step by step, right? The leader's intent on certain policies have become more like, what we really are trying to accomplish with this, why this is important. To tell if they just follow leader's intent, sometimes they're actually gonna do the right thing.
So is this a communication item, that they want
It's-
improved communication
take a
about the
policy.
leader's intent?
Take this is take the major policies and put a little more detail into the why behind the policy and what you're trying to truly accomplish with that policy, and then let the policy flow through. The idea is that you wanna help people do the right thing when maybe a step isn't available to them because of the time of day or the event. That's an easy one to word, like what he said, put it into get out of that thumbnail that is mission driven culture, and get it into something that community can understand.
Okay. I'll wait for the review, I'll wait for the review on that one.
think about a bunch of rigid rule followers and then trying to share with them what your philosophical direction is and say, here's what I want you to do. With all these rules, we want you to do the right thing and be able to sometimes ignore what's in black and white and do what you believe.
Yeah, you
is
don't
the
want
right
to
thing.
blindly following something.
Right, or just be very rigid in the way that they think they have to follow them and really give them the intent, I'm doing the right thing, whatever is moral and ethical, and
Was this driven by staff wanting more clarification on those things, or by
They-
leadership?
well, I think it's kind of a cultural thing where they like to talk about it and they would like policies that are kind of crafted with that vision in mind, not so much a very rigid, A plus B equals B, kind of thing, but.
In
I don't know,
the
it's
police
the call.
service, we used to call it, traditional discretion. Where it's like, a lot of it is discretionary, but it's traditional.
Within this,
We can work
You-
on that.
Very hard, very hard.
What you've got out there makes more sense to me already, so, okay. Robert,
Traditional
I'm
discretion.
not, this is number four.
Chief.
let's have one discussion.
I think that one thing maybe is here, and I'm just not where enough to see it, especially organizational culture and professional development, anything around,
Guys that work.
idea of fairness and equity that goes into any emotional structure or emotion from one place to another. Any, policies and procedures or anything along that line, because sometimes I know within a professional structure that everyone can moan and groan about, why them and not me? Why was I passed over and not someone else? And I don't know, I'm struggling with trying to figure out where any kind of communication or I don't know if it's training or communication that goes on to kind of assure that when there's an opening that takes place, there are individuals that apply for it or having a sense of knowing that they have been fairly treated to have a shot at that particular position. So I see the inclusivity throughout the district, the effort to try to make that happen, but I don't see that equity part, equity part. In here.
Yeah, I feel like it's a piece of what you're describing might be in leadership relating to some of the promotional things under mission two. Maybe professional development program, leadership competencies and attributes can get to a bit of equity when you define effectively the competencies for the job and get away from just how the person looks.
Yeah.
How they behave. We did weave that into leadership because it's about creating the leaders as opposed to dragging it into the culture section. But culture probably weaves into all of these in a bit. But I don't know if that still meets what you're trying to accomplish.
Part of the thing is too, Director, is that, and I don't think it ended up on here as an initiative, because we have almost in whole addressed it and made it fair and objective and equitable in our promotional processes where everybody gets the same information, everyone's given the same test, it's objectively measured, and there's no subjectivity that's included anymore, and people end up coming out on the list. I don't weigh in and put my thumb on the scale at all, and however you show up on the list is how you get promoted. And so that's changed and now happens in the last 2.5 years. And so I think the process now is pretty transparent and people understand it. And so it's generally not a complaint, I will say, with the exception of positions that are for the division chief and deputy chief and at-will positions. And those are, there's a job description, but that is just an interview with me. And it's, usually it's a kind of a combination of fit more than anything. It's very subjective. But that's just for 3 positions in the department. Anyone that goes through the process can follow up with me and get feedback on why they were selected. But just in general, for everyone all the way through battalion chief and any other position that we have in the department, it's all.
So is it integrated into a policy procedure that broadly outlines the process?
Procedures.
It's just, it's become really, really clear. We worked with labor and everybody involved trying to make sure. There had been a lot of complaints in the past about how promotions were handed out, and it's just, the only reason somebody would be skipped over on the list would be if they had significant disciplinary action in their personnel file. Other than that,
So that's a scenario where they could score well, but.
yeah, I'd be like, oh, no, you were suspended 30 days for insubordination. You're not gonna be promoted to that.
Yeah.
So, but that's super clear, and it would be very clearly communicated. So that, I think, is why you're not seeing it as an initiative, because it's, as far as I know, no longer an issue.
There wasn't noise about it in the room.
No.
So one last thing about it, and then I'll be trying to move on the same topic up here. Oftentimes what things get resolved today, tomorrow, or the next day after, next week, it becomes an issue. So I guess it's like when people change, if not, there's no structure there or to follow or continue to try to promote this, what's working. If it's not there, then you may be gone one day, Francine may be gone one day, or we will be. And but what I'm trying to understand is see if there, because your charismaticness of it all, it flows away, but someone else comes in, may not necessarily have that level of account. So is the structure that is in place now allow the structure to take over that point, no matter who's in there, following these steps to make things happen?
Policy driven, right?
Yes, the policy.
I mean,
Policy driven, now could the next chief change all the policies or ignore the policies? Yeah.
Yeah, and then you got the board there to understand and
Sure.
they can correct that. That's the only thing.
and then.
But it starts with having a policy.
And they should have a future strategic plan.
And if they did want to change the policy, I mean, our process is we go through JLC, we meet with all unions before we change any policy to discuss policy revisions. So, there's a process.
Thank you.
I have a quick question on item E. Is that purely EMS focused, such as the EMS manager, or is that a broader topic?
I think it's a broader topic, but the EMS manager was included predominantly because of some of the work they had done recently on professional excellence. So it might be, I'll let you.
It is true, yes, we asked Melanie to lead it because she's so good at recognizing it currently in her EMS system. We would like to steal those ideas and more broadly apply them to provide some recognition to employees.
So is it worth saying something like to enhance beyond the EMS program or something? Maybe
we
it's
could-
too specific, but
Yeah, I know you saw EMS manager and assumed that's what it was for.
Yeah.
We could add a word in there to imply it's,
yeah, I mean, I think it's fine to use.
I think that's.
Yeah, organization.
Perfect.
Yeah,
yes, we can achieve
that works. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of using somebody that's doing it, has passion
Yeah.
for it
that.
to
Yeah.
broaden it out, nothing wrong with that, but it just confusion. Okay, anybody have anything else on four? Virginia has her hand.
Yeah, just a really quick question on E. Dan, if you could, no, F, not E, F. Evaluate current mission and philosophical statements. I know that you've got the chief in there and I mean, that's a pretty big thing, right? And I know that the chief is a big part of that discussion for sure. But, and maybe by way of the chief directly, you know, this is gonna go to the board, for example, but I definitely think the board should be named in there, even though I get that this is more of an operational document, but the current mission and philosophical statements, that's a huge deal.
So, well, I would agree that the board would be involved, but do you want to be named as a person?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just curious, why wouldn't we be? I mean, I know that we aren't in the other areas. I get that. But this is, I'm trying to,
Why not just add on to where appropriate review with the board or something?
yeah,
or consult with the board?
something, because that is so fundamental to the
At the
district,
very end,
right?
just where appropriate, where appropriate, consult with the board or something. I don't think.
Well,
the
I mean,
board
I don't
should
know, because
be-
the word appropriate, Gary, might have a different definition for us versus the chief. Not that it would with this chief, but just, I don't know. I mean, I guess this,
I can add components like what I just added, but ultimately you're the decider. So the fire.
I know,
chief would be creating, like, he would get the organization together, get some feedback from you, come back in, and if he decided he wanted to make a change, he would present it to you. As a
I know,
proposed
I just,
language. And honestly, this one, I think there were some other people kind of interested in leading it, but this is the one that.
well,
This is not an
this is where the
operational
board
piece.
should
This
be
is-
leading it.
This is the
So I-
fundamental piece.
Yeah, I actually have a problem adding with assistance from the board, because that implies in a way that everything else isn't with assistance or oversight from the board. You know, it's like the overall mission statement and direction of the district, it's a board responsibility. But we lean on our chief to guide that process and effort.
I think,
Robert,
go ahead. I think. Turn around and get my bags for you, but I think you shoot there. But I think that you're right in terms of all of it and what Virginia said. I think this last one is more of a board responsibility
Maybe.
to, if not, with the assistance and input of rationale of why the change from the chief. Because, you know, if the community is gonna look at this and ask, they'll come to the board members and ask, well, why you guys change this? You know, and so it's one of those things where, I'm not saying somewhere along the line, the chief is gonna be making, you know, should be there because it may impact his operation or what he does. But I think in terms of changing the mission and the philosophy, I think that's what it said.
I've got a solution for you. What if you
Well,
changed it to,
so
what if you
Gary,
changed it to make instead of evaluate current mission and say, make recommendation to the board for mission and philosophical
That's good.
statements.
I
Well-
like it.
So it's the
Well,
chief's job to make recommendations to the board. It's just
I
as a
mean,
way to.
here's the problem I have with this. This is under organizational culture, right? I mean, so Gary, you've been involved with the district for a long time, but I have been on this board where there has been just this odd organizational culture that's permeated from the leadership of the board members into the operations and the staff, which I don't think has been that great of a culture, right? And I guess that's why, I mean, I think since we're the elected leaders of this board, of the district, not of the board, of the district, and we're supposed to represent our constituents, this organizational culture has to kind of come from us. I mean, yes, it has to come from the chief as well, but we have to also set that tone because the chief is going to rely on what we want or don't want, you know, to kind of do things from an operational standpoint for him to implement, and even, you know, in partnership with the board, what the board wants. And I don't know, I just think that this organizational culture, I just don't, I just think the board, since it has to start with us, we've got to be involved with that. It's almost like, for me at the board level, it's a rules of engagement situation. And so maybe the board policies come into play in this. I don't know. I've just seen the board go kind of rogue sometimes, and it's just kind of, and it's a cultural thing that I think that we need to be more of a leader in that, in shaping that.
My take on it is the edits that Dan just did capture that. That does not preclude the board from having discussions or running a full board process at the discretion of the board. to
Yeah,
look at
but-
the mission Statement or anything else. But as far as the strategic plan for, yeah, the chief administrator of the strategic plan. And I personally don't think we should confuse it with board responsibilities in here. The place to do it is the board policies.
Yeah, no, I know.
That the board's going to, on an annual basis, evaluate the mission and philosophical statements or something. But I think the idea that the chief owns it as part of the organizational culture and everything else, that needs to change at the top level, it comes back to the board.
Well, I guess my heartache, Gary, is where appropriate. My heartache is the words where appropriate, because what's considered appropriate and who deems it appropriate?
Delete the where appropriate.
Well, I think.
Recommendation, it's still a recommendation.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, but where appropriate means that the board can be excluded,
It's gone.
right? If it's not
Gone.
appropriate.
I mean, to me, the real question is what initiate the evaluation or the thought of, evaluating the current mission.
Oh, that was me. It was a question during the thing. I'm like, do you all believe that our mission statement and our core values are currently accurate and reflect who we are as a fire district? It's a much bigger topic than we could have handled in this, as part of the 3-day thing, just figuring those things out. So it's kind of a conversation piece of and when we talk about our mission statement, when we talk about our mission statement, we're not talking about changing the mission of the department, right? And what we do on a daily basis. But it was kind of asking that question and having people, but I don't know who developed the mission statement and whether it really, is reflective of what we all believe our mission is. And also our core values, if we have, those are things like accountability, integrity, and honesty, and, just making statements like that, so.
So this document starts out though with a mission statement.
It's a current one.
Yeah,
In the philosophy.
So is that one that you're saying,
I'm not saying it's good or bad, it was just a question, do we,
so is this item really to reconsider, I mean,
Yes,
is what you're saying is this, there's a recommendation of the group that we need to reconsider the mission and philosophy?
it was, I would argue that the reason if appropriate was in there was because I think there was some ownership by some of the people in the room. And, the if appropriate, allowed them to settle down and allow this to go forward and get reviewed. It's, normally in these processes, we put that on the table as a key discussion. And it often, it ends up being a discussion item in the room, but it's a bigger topic than what that group can solve, right? So this is simply designed to say that we get them off center and at least let's look at this particular messaging and decide if it's appropriate and then if it's right.
Yeah, I just have a suggestion that this kind of triggered, but it relates to these 5 items. I really think there's a qualitative difference between the first one and all the rest of them. And I don't know how you might separate that or distinguish it, but I think this idea, we exist for service to the community. We don't exist for, working out professional development or whatever. And somehow I think the service to the community ought to be a standalone thing here. And it's just a comment about how this is presented.
I was in an organization for years and, the organization had one mission. And that primary mission was to build housing. But over time, the organization got into a lot of other economic development work in the community. So at that point, our mission changed. Something got added to it because a new level of work that the group did needed to be reflected into the overall mission. Because some people just thought it was just mainly doing housing, but no, there was other economic development work. So that we went through that process, because we had the same kind of conversation, people asking, why are you changing your mission? Well, we're doing something else a little bit different right now. So to reflect really what we do, I think that's important. Periodically step back, look at it and see, are we doing other things than what we used to do? And if so, maybe we should. If it's gonna be a permanent kind of thing in our operation, maybe we should change it. So, and some of the things I'm all for this, and seeing certain things that maybe that's new that's been added to what our operation is, maybe we need to weave it into the mission statement. But that process needs to take place, and I think who's responsible, it can be the janitors coming in and cleaning floors. I don't care, it doesn't matter, as long as it comes back to the board. I think that's what the process, that the meeting ultimate decision making changes.
I think organizations generally and what they focus on evolves over time. I think there's a lot of fire agencies across the country when you read different articles about different agencies that are revisiting their evolution from being a fire service to being an emergency medical service. Because with fire safety and all the new initiatives, the frequency of fires has gone down, but the aging population is driving the EMS business way up. And so I think a lot of agencies are going through a pretty detailed revisiting of what's our primary focus. We need to be able to respond and put out a building fire, but most of the time we're responding on medical emergencies.
Just help.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that change if everybody's put eyes on that.
Okay.
I like it.
Virginia, you agree with that?
You mean
For
F,
item
all
F?
the,
Yes,
yeah,
that sounds more like a not sure, yeah.
And It does not
That's what I
preclude,
would
as I
I mean,
said before,
because it's a
I
living
don't think it
document,
precludes
Dan,
the
I
board
think
from working on
it's
it
gonna
independently.
evolve. I mean, we can, I think my heartache was where, the words where appropriate, but I mean, it is a living document and let's just see how it goes. I mean, I get where we're coming from. I've been on this board, this is for a long time, and I've just seen how the organizational culture can change and then not change. And, it's just,
Yeah,
anyway, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. The organizational culture, I think, is so important. And when I first got on the board in 2011, it wasn't great. And, it took a lot of work to get it to change. And it just takes so little effort to not make it good again. So that's why I'm focusing on that. So,
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna get up on my soapbox of everybody here, but it's, at the end of the day, the organizational culture is so directly tied to the person at the top of the organization. That is the individual that owns and establishes it. So I don't think there's anything you can build into your processes, your policies, your procedures, or anything else that protect you against what the next individual might do and how they run the organization. But that, other than the board making a decision that says, we don't like the outcome of that.
I
So
know.
we're going to terminate that employment and find a new chief.
I mean, that's why my yes doesn't sound, I mean, I think this is the best that we're gonna do right now.
You try to select somebody that embodies and appreciates the culture that we've developed. And if they get here and that's not the case, then that's a different issue you've got to deal with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I know, yeah. I mean, so I'm fine with it, but I'm
Okay.
just, I'm fine with it now that we've got the words where appropriate, delete it.
Okay, let's move on to
but
operational infrastructure. And my only one on this, the whole section was the Captain Randy Kelly versus training captain.
is that,
I also wanted
should that be
to
a training captain?
include,
That's.
what's John Hitchcock's title? Since he does a lot of the logistics stuff.
Senior management analyst.
He's what? Okay, maybe not use his name, use the position,
Or which one?
or the same one that, was review options for managing logistics and distribution functions more effectively. I think you should have a tool, admin and firefighter.
Randy, so Randy,
Oh,
you include both?
See?
Well, it's C here, on my document it's V, but it's C up there.
How is it different on
You cut it. You have John, is John Hitchcock named on yours?
No.
Oh, you're suggesting.
I'm
add
suggesting
his
that,
position.
well, his position be there, being a representative of administration, since, he effectively does the logistics facilities.
Is that?
That we under C.
What's his position again?
Here I have.
Senior management analyst.
Yeah, we need to, we'll check, if it's appropriate, we'll add John, I think that might be. Yeah,
That's how I read it, is it's the station logistics of supplies, making the distribution system of supplies throughout the district, which John doesn't have anything to do with.
Well, through. Okay. All right. I read it a little bit different. I read it as an overall perspective.
So maybe we need to improve the wording on that to be more specific.
so I'll go back and double check that that's what the intent was.
Okay.
And we can modify the wording so it's clear, and if not, we'll also modify the wording and include, John Hitchcock.
Yeah,
Just as a private. I just need to dig back into that, so.
Anybody else have anything else?
That's one thing I had. Thank you, Gary. That's where I started.
Anybody else on operational infrastructure? I mean, I'm not surprised by the kind of passion on issues goes down as you leave the service to the community, but that I think goes back a little bit to what Chuck was saying. That's naturally going to be the primary focus of the board, but within an organization, that's the outcome they all strive for, all these other things to support that mission, but I'm comfortable with the way it's outlined here in the document. I think it gets really complex to try to call it out separately. So, anybody have any other thoughts on it? So I think the follow-up action is in the new year is for the board to spend some time, get a little more detail on this with the chief and try to get the top handful of initiatives identified. Yeah, I don't know that prioritizing the 1 to 23 list is the right thing, but kind of the chief having clarity that says, here's the top 3 to 5 items on this list of the board. That would be consistent, I think, with the board, kind of the way the board has historically run the chief's evaluation process of what are the areas of change improvement that the board has passion on. And I think if you go back to that discussion document of your evaluation, performance evaluation, it'll probably set the priority for the 5 items, if I had to guess.
Well, I think within those 5, I guess these 6 items, I thought we were talking about there are priorities within that structure.
Right.
And then within that structure, you know, I mean, of course, you start off with number 1, you know, get the number at the end. And I think setting that probably is really important, you know, to understand the timeline and structure in this next year of what it will about in the board and followed by the board, you know, and target or the discussion may take place.
And when you run this process and advising, you know, fire organizations on this kind of process, do you ever see it where they actually build out, you have a responsible timeline and then 3 to 5 key initiatives for each
Yeah,
item?
Yeah,
Because to me, that's kind of what's missing.
it is.
It's a little bit of the meat on the bones.
It is in here, but I think that comes realistically, I believe that comes in those quarterly meetings that you're describing and ramps up to a document with more meat on the bones for the next fiscal year. So you spend your time getting ready, and when you present 6 action items that are gonna be funded this year, time spent, that work gets done before the budget comes in and you start identifying those key things. So the training captain brings 4 or 5 people together and says, let's talk, what are the things we need to do to accomplish this? Makes the list, and then that gets presented. The thing I like about that being embedded into the budget document, even if it's just a section of it, it is your public facing document that says we are collecting your tax money and this is what we're doing with it, right? And it's a very simple process to go, but spending time with the group here with the, you know, or even us trying to identify those action items, it's not the right people in the room for every task.
I'd also like to see, I think just input for the chief that I think would be helpful is once we determine, the board determines the 4 or 5, whatever the handful is of initiatives that are the top priority, is that when the board's discussing them, is have the person responsible guiding the presentation. And then rather than just be a discussion, actually have them present and say, this is what we're doing on this item. This is our plan, this is where we're at, this is our plan, this is where we're going. And I think that will also just increase the visibility of the board to more of the staff at various ranks of the organization as well. Because otherwise, I think on an ongoing basis, the board has a pretty limited touch point with a small, relatively small subset of the team.
Yeah.
In general.
The part that makes me confident this is gonna move forward was the feeling in the room, the commitment in the wording, is the same dialogue occurred with them. The raising of hands, right? And the multitude of names on here. If there was only one name on here, it wouldn't be the same. And I'm really confident that your motivation to do the quarterly meetings, the staff's motivation to make a difference, and the fact that this is not an overwhelming document is gonna allow it to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can see easily where we could make this a 100-page document.
Like that.
And lose all of its effectiveness in the
And
process.
all it would do then
Do any of the board members have any additional input on strategic plan?
I have a slight concern, not for me personally or the board, but that having these names on there may violate kind of organizational structure in some ways. In other words, having a captain presenting how it's gonna be to the division chiefs is not the normal hierarchical approach. I'm just expressing that nobody has to prove me wrong. I'm just saying it's a slight concern to me. I'm not sure if I were doing this for my organization, I wouldn't put any names here. I would just have the fire chief bring up whatever resources he wants to help him present. But I'm not sure I put it in here because somehow it formalizes a kind of different structure than the normal hierarchical structure. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, this is consistent with, in my corporate life, the way I ran companies is the people that have the most passion for driving initiatives, giving them visibility is partly how we got a lot of organizational buy-in, but your point's well taken. I think that's a discretion of the
Well,
chief
if it's the
issue.
wrong organization, it could be how it gets torpedoed also.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. Virginia, anything else while you're on Zoom? Make sure we capture everybody in the room.
No, thanks.
Anybody else have anything? Okay.
Yes.
Well, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you, Dan, for refereeing our meeting here and helping guide the process. I think we're landing in a good spot, and with a few modifications we've discussed, I think we'll have a solid strategy.
Yeah, before you adjourn, Mike, I just, as far as the next steps go, obviously, we're gonna go back and make some revisions and changes to this. You know, my hope was that we'd be bringing it to the board in the January meeting for approval and support. Just kind of getting a feel for whether the board would be open to that. I mean,
Give me that.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's, so it's
I
great.
think it's a great way to kick off the new year with the board, the new calendar year.
And then we will, yeah, then we will just, work to schedule those quarterly conversations.
Okay, anybody have anything else? Not seeing any public comment because we haven't had any public weigh in. So on that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much. We'll see you next week, regular scheduled meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.